February 19, 1945. 0200 hours. The Black Ocean off Iwo Jima was a sheet of wet obsidian under a low, bruised moon. From the deck of LST 482, the air tasted like diesel and iron. Men moved with the slow, precise panic of troops who have rehearsed their panic into routine. Corporal James "Jimmy" Malone stood at the rail, rain slicking the brim of his utility cap, and watched the island grow out of night. Rugged, vertical, a silhouette of cliffs and jagged volcanic sand. Somewhere behind the darkness, the thunder of naval guns, a slow living thing that rolled shoreward and folded into white steam on black rock. He was 23, a Marine Corps field radio operator assigned to Battery C, 2nd Battalion, 14th Marines. Malone had the permanent bruise of salt on his cheeks, and the way a man looks at a thing he has decided to survive, steady, measured. Over his shoulder was the antenna pack, cramped, sweaty canvas that smelled like tobacco and gun oil. His hands remembered the chewed leather of his M1 Garand. His left fist kept finding its way to the radio's tuning box, where a cloth rag was tucked like a charm. At 0300 hours, the LST's ramp clanked down. The world turned to a strobing halo of tracer and French fire. Searchlights pawed the sky. Malone rode in an Amtrak, the armored tractor that had the awkward gait of a drunken pitcher, its belly full of men, a cold, copper smell combining with spent powder. Around him were boys who had been thrust into manhood overnight. A corporal with a cigarette stub behind one ear, a lance corporal who hummed to himself to keep from hearing, a private who prayed under his breath in a voice that was all teeth. The orders arrived like a thin coin dropped on a concrete floor. Battery C was to provide a forward observation party, to call naval gunfire and direct close artillery on a fortified Japanese emplacement they called Hill 382. Intelligence, cobbled, confident, brittle, said the position bracketed the main landing beaches and had chewed through 2 prior battalion pushes. The battalion commander had scrawled the words on the back of the map with a blunt finger. Dangerous. High casualties likely. In the mess tent, the captain had said it plainly. They'll call it suicide. That's what the men said in the dark, stark, unavoidable. Suicide. The word passed along the hull like a draft. Malone heard it and tucked it away like a stone. It didn't change the map. It didn't change the orders. What changed was the shape of his breath. They landed under a low, cooperating barrage. The first beach was a mosaic of bodies and equipment, and the living trying to stay inside the mortar's shadow. The sand was fine and hot as ash despite the night. It clung to boots and skin, a second uniform that fell into their mouths when they breathed. Machines whined. The distant hiss of flame projectors, the ratcheting gears of Sherman tanks working to find purchase on the black sand. Up on the ridge, silhouetted against a flare, lines of enemy light, slick and determined, glowed like a second set of eyes. Malone's team, Lieutenant Samuel R. Hale, 2 forward observers, Malone as the radio operator, and a rhythm of runners, moved with the sort of compact, silent coordination carved out of training. Lieutenant Hale had the look of a man who'd read every manual and then set it aside. His jaw was a blunt rule, his eyes the kind that watched not for targets, but for what would happen if targets were missed. He wore a cracked leather map case under his greatcoat and clutched a compass like an extra pair of teeth. One of the observers, Private First Class Eddie Red Vargas, had a small silver lighter he clicked to blow anxiety into sparks. The other, Corporal Frank Ito, was quiet, eyes like chips of ice, an ex-interpreter pressed into the grind of combat. Their mission was surgical in outline but monstrous in execution. Move past the shoreline's booby traps and the island's first ring of defenses, get to an observation point above the hill, and call in prearranged naval and artillery concentrations to break the position before the company attack went in at first light. The Navy would lay down fire. The batteries offshore would punch the hill until the defender's breath came in small, sputtering gasps. It read logical on a sheet of paper. In the field, under tracer, and in the wet sand, logic becomes a small, vulnerable thing. They crawled through a wasteland of twisted hedgerows. Old Japanese blockhouses half collapsed into themselves, coral walls riddled like honeycombs. Malfunctioning mortars threw up curtains of black dust. A tank's engine thinned into silence in the not-too-distant background. The forward observers had to advance in sight line. The radio had to be within range. The naval guns had to be given coordinates precise enough to blast the enemy out of their holes and not the men calling the fire. "You all right, Malone?" Hale whispered, as if the night could hear him. "Roger, sir," Malone replied, though his throat was dry, a paper rag. He thumbed the radio's voice key, an animal habit, feeling the friction of its switch, listening for the faint static that meant the signal would bite into the sky and find the ships. The handset felt like a breathing thing in his hands. Every time he spoke, a thread of men on the other end had to decide whether to send steel screaming across the water. They reached a narrow defile marked by a shattered telephone pole and the bent ribs of a landing craft. From here, the map promised a short climb and the observation post. From here, the men could see the lights of their own ships, sullen, distant, and the ghostly, bright tracers that knitted the horizon. The hillside smelled of sulfur and old smoke, and the wind brought the faint, metallic tang of blood. Hale unfolded the map under a flare's brief mercy and traced the coordinates with a finger stained by grease. He looked up at Malone. "We take the ridge, call the pattern, then extract," he said. "We don't linger." "Pattern?" Vargas asked, the lighter's tiny flame guttering over his thumb. Hale's jaw tightened. "H-type, 120 seconds between salvos. Keep the net clear. If they ask whether it's a high-risk lead, say yes. They'll know what it means." "Suicide," someone muttered behind them, but Hale's eyes never left the map. Malone felt the map like a cold thing against his skin. He thought of home, of a small town with a train that screamed through it, of his mother's baking smell. The thought lasted the length of a breath and then was gone, replaced by the tight, white focus of men on a goal. He clipped the handset to his collar and took his first position, the radio an extension of his body. They were 30 minutes from the ridge. The beach behind them was losing its morning fog. The first chorus of shells from the destroyers hit the slope in a thunder that rattled teeth and boot metal. Everyone knew, as if they had rehearsed the moment inside their skulls, that what followed would be louder than any fear. It would be final. It would be precise. Someone in the company called it suicide again, half as an observation, half as a dare. Malone kept his voice for the radio, his fingers for the key. The mission had a name for itself now, something that would keep the men honest, blunt, and true. The ridge awaited, and beyond it, the hinge of fate. 0435 hours. The sun wasn't up yet, but the sky had begun to peel open into a gray that felt more like exhaustion than daylight. The ridge was a jagged spine of volcanic rock jutting from the earth like the exposed ribs of some ancient animal. Every step toward it brought a new sound, stone cracking under boots, the distant metallic chatter of Type 92 machine guns, the heavy, uneven thumps of mortars landing too close to be academic. Lieutenant Hale held up a clenched fist. The team froze, breath visible in thin clouds. Malone dropped to one knee, easing the radio pack against the slope. The world narrowed to a strip of ground in front of him and the thrum of his heartbeat in his ears. Hale scanned the ridge with binoculars, slowly, deliberately, while Vargas and Ito covered the flanks. 2 pillboxes, Hale whispered. One at the crest. One offset to the right, maybe 20 meters back. Entrances facing northeast. They'll have interlocking fire. Ito nodded once. Expect spotters behind them. Could be a tunnel system. Malone's hand hovered over the handset. "Sir, range should be good from here." Hale shook his head. "We need higher ground. Naval wants a clean angle. Up the slope." It wasn't a request. The men moved. The climb was steep, the volcanic gravel sliding under their weight like tiny glass shards. Twice Malone's boots sank into soft ash and nearly toppled him backward, the antenna jangling. Vargas hauled him forward the second time with a grip that felt like it was welded on. Halfway up, the first enemy round cracked overhead, sharp, flat, unmistakable. The second came a heartbeat later, chewing into the rock next to Hale's shoulder with a spit of stone fragments. "Down!" Hale barked. The team dropped behind a narrow fold in the slope as more rounds stitched the ridge. Malone pressed himself into the sand, tasting iron and grit. Ito pointed with 2 fingers toward a barely visible muzzle flash on the right flank. "Spotter!" Dug in. "They're adjusting." Hale exhaled once. "Malone, raise the USS Pensacola. Fire mission. Malone rolled to his side, keyed the radio, and let the static settle. Pensacola, this is Red Dog 2-1. Request fire mission. Over. A pause. Then, Red Dog 2-1, send grid. Hale whispered coordinates, each number crisp despite the gunfire. Malone repeated them, aware of how each syllable felt like a lever pulled on fate. Red Dog 2-1, confirm high-risk proximity target. Hale nodded. Malone swallowed. Affirmative. Danger close. Will mark. A final pause. Rounds inbound. 90 seconds. 90 seconds. The team pushed upward under the renewed crack of rifle fire. Hale motioned them toward a cluster of boulders near the crest, an improvised overlook with a narrow view into the valley beyond. The pillboxes loomed ahead as angular shadows, their embrasures black and hungry. They reached the rocks at a crouch. Hale raised a red smoke grenade, thumbed the pin, and lobbed it downslope. It hissed into a thick plume that crawled upward like bloody mist. Malone listened. Behind the whistle of wind and rifles, he found the low, building rumble, distant, massive, of naval shells carving air. 30 seconds, he shouted. The ridge exploded with hostile gunfire. A machine gun on the right pillbox opened up, its tracers cracking past their ears and sparking off stone. Ito fired downward, measured bursts, trying to suppress. Vargas flanked left, but a mortar round landed close enough to flip him off his feet and dump him behind a rock with a groan. Malone crawled toward him. Red, you hit. Just rattled, Vargas hissed, rolling onto his elbow. Don't pick me up. Not yet. 10 seconds. Malone yelled instinctively, though the naval guns could not hear him. Hale pressed himself against the rock face, map case pinned to his chest. Brace. The first shell arrived like God exhaling through a steel throat. A white flash swallowed the valley. The ground punched upward. Fragments of stone and shrapnel screamed across the ridge. The pillbox on the right took a direct hit. Its roof buckled, a violent blossom of dust erupting out of every crack. The men ducked instinctively. The shockwave rolled over them like a breaking wave. Adjust fire, Hale shouted, but Malone didn't need instruction. His hand was already on the handset. Pensacola, adjust left 50, add 20. Fire for effect. Copy, 50 left, add 20. Rounds out. More inbound. Malone felt the ridge vibrate through his ribs. Then, a scream. Ito's. Malone spun. A rifle round had clipped Ito's thigh, spinning him backward, dragging him down the slope. His foot caught a jagged rock, halting his fall, but leaving him exposed, wide open to the pillbox's surviving gun. Cover him, Hale shouted. Vargas fired blind bursts, but the gun was raking the slope, tracing toward Ito. Malone didn't think. He moved. He slid down the incline, boots skidding on loose ash, one hand gripping the radio pack to keep it from catching. The machine gun's roar hammered his eardrums. A round sparked inches from his knee. Ito reached up, fingers shaking. Don't get yourself. Malone grabbed him under the armpits and yanked, muscles screaming. The slope fought him, gravity pulling them back toward the kill zone. The radio antenna scraped rock. The pack threatened to pull him sideways. Above them, Hale fired in controlled bursts, trying to disrupt the pillbox. Vargas reloaded with trembling hands. Malone planted his heel, pulled with everything he had, and in one brutal second dragged Ito behind the ridge's natural fold. Just as a second burst chewed the ground where Ito's head had been. 2 lives saved in 1 second, Ito's and his own. Malone collapsed beside him, panting, heart jackhammering. Thank you, Ito whispered, face pale. Malone forced a breath. Stay still. Above them, the next salvo of naval shells was inbound, screaming like the sky tearing open. For a heartbeat, the entire ridge seemed to hold its breath. The air thinned. Dust hung motionless. Malone felt the pressure shift inside his ears, an instinctive warning that the world was about to come apart. Then the sky dropped. The second salvo hit with a concussive violence that folded sound into a single, monstrous note. The ground convulsed beneath them, shifting, buckling, and then settling with a groan like something alive. A column of pulverized ash exploded upward, rolling over the ridge in a choking wave of smoke and grit. Malone shielded Ito with his body, pressing them both against the rock. The blast felt like a giant hand slapping the earth. Every bone inside him quivered. Chunks of shattered pillbox rained down around them, small pieces clattering against his helmet like thrown gravel. For a moment, nothing moved. Even the enemy guns had gone silent. Malone rolled off Ito, brushing dust from his face. "You good?" he asked, though Ito's pallor said otherwise. Ito managed a faint nod. "Leg burning. But I'm here." A dark line of blood seeped through Ito's torn trouser leg. Malone tore a field dressing open with his teeth, hands trembling from residual shock waves, and wrapped the gauze around the wound as tightly as Ito's groan would allow. Above them, Hale's silhouette appeared against the drifting smoke. "Malone, report." "Red and Ito down here, sir." Malone shouted back. "Ito's hit, but stable." Red's dinged up. "I'm intact." Vargas raised a thumb without standing. "Still handsome too, LT," he called hoarsely. Hale ignored the joke. "Enemy positions?" Malone scrambled up the incline enough to peek over the natural fold. The right pillbox, once a squat block of reinforced concrete, was now a collapsing ruin, half buried in dust. Its firing slit was a jagged hole leaking smoke. The other pillbox up the crest still stood, though its roof was cracked like an eggshell. But then Malone saw movement. Low, purposeful shadows slipping out from behind the remaining pillbox. Japanese soldiers, 3, no, 4 of them, darting from shadow to shadow along a trench that wrapped around the hillside. "Movement," Malone barked. "Trench line crest side. Closing fast." Hale didn't hesitate. "Malone, get naval back on the line. We need another pattern." "Red, shift fire left." "Ito, stay down." Malone yanked the handset up to his mouth, the radio's familiar hum grounding him amidst the chaos. "Pensacola, this is Red Dog 2-1. Fire for effect on previous coordinates. Repeat, fire for effect. Enemy infantry maneuvering." Static hissed. Then, Red Dog 2-1, acknowledged. "Rounds outbound. Impact 1 minute." 1 minute, Malone muttered. It might as well have been an hour. The enemy squad was already halfway across the trench, rifles glinting in the ember-like sunrise beginning to stain the horizon. Their movements were quick, synchronized. These weren't panicked defenders. They were disciplined counterattack troops, determined to drive the observers off the ridge before the fire missions could finish the hill. Vargas fired down at them, rounds sparking off the trench lip. Hale joined him, maintaining measured rhythm, conserving ammunition. Malone held Ito's shoulder down as the wounded corporal tried to rise. "Stay put," Malone whispered. Ito gritted his teeth. "Don't let them flank us." "We won't." Malone repositioned himself slightly higher along the rock and caught sight of a second movement. Another squad hugging the far lip of the slope, attempting to wrap around behind them. He swore. "LT, they're splitting. One group frontal, one swinging right." Hale swore under his breath. "Malone, smoke." Malone pulled a white phosphorus grenade from his belt, thumbed the pin, and hurled it toward the right flank. It detonated in a violent hiss, pouring thick white smoke across the slope. The encroaching squad vanished into the fog bank, coughing and scrambling. "Buy us a little time," Hale said. "Not enough." The frontal squad was still advancing, using every scrap of cover. One soldier lobbed a grenade, an oval Type 97, its fuse sizzling as it hopped along the stone toward them. "Grenade," Vargas shouted. Instinct overrode thought. Malone kicked off the rock, lunged, and snatched the grenade mid-bounce. Its metal body was hot, seconds from cooking off. Without aim, without breath, he hurled it back toward the trench. It exploded halfway along its arc, the blast ripping a chunk of air out of the ridge and sending fragments whizzing past his face. "Malone," Hale barked. "You trying to die before the Navy saves you?" Before Malone could answer, the ridge shuddered again. Inbound naval shells. "Down," he screamed. The world erupted. The naval barrage tore into the far slope and trench like a jaws snapping shut. Pillars of rock and earth lifted into the air, followed by the echoing crack of structures collapsing. The enemy squad on the flank vanished in the smoke-clouded chaos. The frontal squad was thrown backward, limbs flailing as the blast flattened the trench. The ridge vibrated, shook, and then settled into a low, groaning stillness. When Malone raised his head, the battlefield was transformed. Less ridge, more cratered scar. Smoke drifted in long sheets. The air smelled of burning rope and cracked stone. Hale surveyed the ruin. "Positions neutralized," he said quietly. We have to move before they regroup. Malone, check comms. We're coordinating the final strike. Malone nodded, wiping grit off the handset. His heart still hammered from the grenade, from the blast, from the razor-thin margin that separated survival from oblivion. He keyed the radio, listening for Pensacola's voice across the static. Red Dog 2-1. The ship replied, standing by for next fire mission. Hale knelt beside Malone, eyes sharp, jaw set. This is it, Corporal. The final push. We hold this ridge until the attack companies reach the slope. No matter what comes next, this ridge doesn't fall. Malone nodded once. The ridge didn't feel like a piece of terrain anymore. It felt like a promise. 0550 hours. The first edge of sunrise clawed over Iwo Jima's horizon, painting the volcanic rock in bloodshot orange. The ridge, scarred, cracked, and trembling under the lingering echoes of naval fire, seemed almost to pulse beneath their boots. The world was a landscape of heat and smoke, every breath thick with sulfur. Hale crouched beside Malone, one finger pressed against the map, the other against the ridge's jagged rock. He wasn't speaking, but his silence carried command. Stay sharp, stay ready, stay alive. Vargas, still bruised from the earlier blast, checked his bar magazine with shaking hands. Ito gripped his rifle with white-knuckled focus, jaw locked against the pain in his thigh. Then, a distant rumble. Not naval guns. Not friendly armor. Something else. Malone heard it first as a vibration in the rock. Hale felt it next, eyes narrowing. It grew, a rolling, rhythmic thunder, like a drumbeat rising out of the earth. Movement, Hale said. A lot of it. Malone lifted his head over the ridge's lip and felt his stomach twist. A counterattack. Dozens, no, possibly over 100. Japanese infantry emerged from the shattered network of trenches and spider holes farther down the slope. Their silhouettes flickered in and out of the drifting smoke, rifles raised, bayonets fixed, voices rising in a ragged, furious shout that echoed across the valley. Not a probing attack. A charge. They're coming hard. Malone called out. Company-sized element, maybe more. Hill didn't flinch. Malone, get me battalion. Now. Malone worked the handset with frantic precision. Firefly 6, this is Red Dog 2-1. We have a full-force counterattack heading for Hill 382. Request immediate artillery support. Static chewed the edge of the transmission. Then, Red Dog 2-1, all batteries engaged on priority targets. You are the farthest forward unit. Confirm you are danger close. Malone met Hale's gaze. Hale nodded once. Malone swallowed. Affirmative. Danger close. We'll mark our line. Ito shifted painfully. They'll fire right on top of us. Better that than being overrun, Hale said. Vargas braced his bar and spat into the dust. Hell of a breakfast. Hale pulled another smoke grenade. Yellow this time. Yanked the pin and hurled it downslope. The plume rose like a golden pillar, marking their position for friendly artillery. Positions. Hale ordered. Malone slid behind a rocky outcrop, radio still at his side. Ito lay prone, rifle steady. Vargas settled into a firing stance with the bar, breath slow and controlled. Hale aimed down his M1, expression carved from stone. The first wave of charging soldiers crested the smoke. Hale's shot dropped the lead runner. Vargas unleashed a full burst, the bars deep, chattering rhythm ripping through the morning air. Ito's precise fire clipped another soldier mid-step, sending him tumbling backward. But the wave didn't stop. It only thickened. Within seconds, the slope was alive with motion, shadows and shouts, muzzle flashes flickering like sparks in a furnace. Bullets chewed the rock around them, cracking splinters of volcanic glass into the air. Malone ducked as a round snapped inches past his antenna. He keyed the radio again, shouting over the chaos. Firefly 6, Red Dog 2-1. Mark is thrown. We need the barrage now. Repeat now. Red Dog 2-1, battery is firing. Impact in 45 seconds. 45 seconds. A lifetime. Hale's voice was calm, even as rounds zipped past his head. Hold them off. Just hold. Vargas's bar thudded against his shoulder, chains of brass casings spilling into the dust. Ito fought to keep pressure on the flank, his injured leg trembling, but his aim unbroken. Malone grabbed his Garand, firing between calls on the radio, each shot sending recoil into his shoulder. But the enemy kept coming. Some dove into craters for cover. Others pressed straight up the slope, climbing over their fallen comrades, driven by a momentum that felt less like strategy and more like inevitability. A grenade clattered behind them. Malone spun, grabbed it, and kicked it down the slope, where it detonated midair in a violent burst of dirt. The shockwave threw him sideways. He hit the ground hard, his radio pack cracking against stone. "Malone!" Hale shouted. "You hit." Malone forced air back into his lungs. "Still here." He crawled back to the ridge just as Ito's rifle clicked empty. Vargas yelled for another magazine, but the assault was so intense neither man could break cover long enough to toss one. 20 seconds to impact. Malone yelled. A bayonet flashed. A Japanese soldier had closed within 20 meters, too close for comfort. He sprinted through the smoke, screaming, rifle raised. Hale pivoted, fired, and the charging soldier collapsed into the ash. But 3 more appeared behind him. Malone's heart hammered so hard he could feel it in his teeth. The ridge was seconds away from being overrun. He reached for another clip, and the world went white. The final artillery barrage struck. A wall of sound swallowed everything. It roared across the ridge with apocalyptic force, a rolling curtain of fire and smoke that consumed the slope in a single, consuming breath. Trees, trenches, men, everything vanished inside the blast. Shockwaves hammered their bodies into the rocks. The ground heaved like a living thing. Malone wasn't sure when he had thrown himself over Ito or when Hale had dragged Vargas behind a jutting boulder. He wasn't aware of the scream the air made as it tore apart. He wasn't conscious of his own voice shouting something he'd never remember. But he knew one thing. The ridge held. When the smoke finally thinned, Hale rose slowly, helmet askew, face cut with ash and blood. "Malone," he rasped. "Report." Malone lifted the handset with shaking hands, listening for a signal beneath the ringing in his ears. "Red Dog 2-1 still operational," he whispered. "Ridge is secure." But as the words left his mouth, the radio sputtered. Static. Then, "Red Dog 2-1, stand by. We have new orders for your team." Hale's eyes narrowed. "More?" Vargas groaned. "We just flattened half the island." Malone steadied the handset as the message came through. "Red Dog 2-1, advance to the next observation point. The attack companies are moving. You're still the forward eyes." Hale tightened his jaw. The mission wasn't over. Not even close. 0615 hours. Smoke coiled off the ridge in long, wavering sheets, the rising sun turning every drifting tendril into molten gold. The ground under Malone's boots still trembled with the aftershocks of the artillery barrage, like the island refused to settle, refused to stop remembering what had just happened. Vargas spat black dust, wiped his face, and muttered, "Next observation point? What do they want us to observe? The center of the earth." Ito tried to sit up, but winced, grabbing his thigh. "If we move fast, maybe we can beat the next counterattack." Hale scanned the slope below them. The Japanese charge had been obliterated, bodies, debris, and cratered earth stretching down the hillside like a raw wound. But he didn't relax. His gaze was already shifting, searching for the path ahead. "The next OP is marked along this ridge line," Hale said, tapping the map. "We stay on the shadowed side. Minimal silhouette. If the companies are moving up, we're their eyes, their ears, their lifeline. We cannot slow down." Malone steadied his breathing. His shoulders ached from the radio pack. His throat burned from smoke. His hands shook from adrenaline, but the mission pulled him forward like a tide. He nodded. "Ready, sir." Hale turned to Ito. "You hold here until stretcher teams reach you." "That's an order." Ito tried to protest. "Sir, I can still." "You held the line," Hale cut in quietly. "Now you survive it." Ito's jaw trembled once. Then he nodded. Vargas squeezed Ito's shoulder. "Don't go anywhere. And don't let anyone steal my smokes." Ito managed a faint smile. "As long as you bring some back." Hale rose. "Move out." They began descending the far side of the ridge, cautious, quiet, staying low along the fractured rock. The ground was uneven, a chaos of shell holes and collapsed tunnel mouths. Steam leaked from fissures in the earth, volcanic breath that stung the eyes and carried the smell of scorched metal. Malone's boots crunched over broken coral and glassy slag left by the bombardments. His fingers brushed the radio's tuning dial, a grounding gesture, a reminder of his purpose. Every few steps, he pressed the handset close, listening for updates from battalion. Vargas crouched ahead, scanning each shadow with his bar raised. LT, you feel that? Hale paused. What? Vargas tilted his chin toward the ground. Like the island's humming. Malone felt it too. A vibration. Low, faint. Not artillery. Not engines. Something beneath them. Subsurface tunnels, Hale said. Network runs through the whole northern sector. Malone swallowed. He'd heard the briefings. The Japanese defenders lived underground, emerged like ghosts, attacked like shadows, vanished like smoke. Stay tight, Hale whispered. No strays. They moved forward again, weaving between jagged boulders that jutted like the ribs of some fossilized giant. The sun crept higher, the heat intensifying until sweat stung Malone's eyes. Then, a sound. Soft. A scrape of stone. Vargas froze. Raised a fist. Hale dropped to a knee. Malone slid behind cover, steadying the handset in one hand and his M1 in the other. Silence. Then two figures emerged from the smoke ahead. American Marines, bandaged, staggering, one leaning heavily against the other. Their uniforms were gray with ash. Their helmets hung crookedly. Both looked like men who'd passed through hell by mistake. Hold your fire, Hale whispered urgently. The two Marines limped toward them, coughing. Malone and Vargas rushed forward to help. One of the men, a corporal, collapsed into Malone's arms, gasping for breath. Thank God. Thought we were alone out here, the corporal rasped. Hale knelt beside them. What unit? Fox Company, what's left of it, the corporal muttered. We got pinned trying to flank the hill. Lost half the squad. The tunnels, his voice cracked. They came out of the ground. Out of the damn ground. Malone felt the ridge's faint rumble again, like the island listening. Hale's jaw tightened. Where? The Marine pointed with a trembling hand. Ahead, 200 meters. A cave mouth under the ledge. You get near it. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Everyone understood. An ambush point. A defensive nest. A kill zone. Vargas glanced at Hale. Sir, if we go near that, we're walking into a meat grinder. Hale exhaled. We don't have a choice. Battalion needs eyes forward. If that cave covers the approach, the whole assault will stall. He turned to Malone. You call and smoke. Naval won't target that close without line of sight confirmation. But if we create cover, we can slip past without getting shredded. Malone lifted the handset, heart pounding. Red Dog 2-1 to Firefly 6. Request smoke curtain on grid. The radio crackled abruptly. Then a voice, panicked, fractured. Any fire control unit. This is Blue 6. We're pinned at the base of Hill 382. We need immediate support. Anyone on the net, respond. Hale's eyes snapped to Malone. Take it, he said. Malone keyed the handset. Blue 6, this is Red Dog 2-1. We read you. What's your position? Static. Then, northwest approach, cut off, casualties mounting, tunnels, God, tunnels everywhere. Malone felt the ground tremble again beneath his boots. Something moved below them. Vargas whispered, LT, they're under us. Hill's expression hardened. Malone, get smoke. Get naval. Get anyone. We're stepping into the mouth of the beast. Malone gripped the radio tighter, voice steady even while his pulse thundered. Firefly 6, immediate smoke on my mark. Naval, stand by for rapid fire adjustment. Red Dog 2-1 advancing. He exhaled. Mark. Smoke rounds began to fall. Thin trails at first, then thick, pooling clouds that swallowed the ridge ahead. The world turned white. Hale rose into the haze. Stay close, he commanded. Move. And into the blinding smoke, the last refuge they had, they advanced. The jungle was still ringing from the concussion of the explosion when Staff Sergeant Joseph Joe Hanks forced himself upright, ears whining, mouth full of grit, vision swimming in and out like a faulty signal. For a moment, he saw nothing but drifting plumes of pulverized coral and the dark silhouettes of shattered palm trunks, snapped like matchsticks. Then, movement. A figure lay half-buried under a collapsed root system, pinned beneath a tangled mass of soil, splintered wood, and debris from the Japanese artillery pit that had just detonated. Joe's brain hadn't caught up yet. His heartbeat felt out of sync with reality, slow, heavy, like his chest was underwater. But instinct was faster. Corpseman, he tried to shout, but it came out thin, strangled by dust, and the metallic taste of blood. He staggered toward the silhouette. As the settling haze thinned, he recognized the helmet, olive drab, dinted, half-buried. Private First Class Danny Rourke, 18 years old, youngest in the company. The kid who still carried hard candy in his breast pocket because his sister mailed him a bag every week. Joe dropped to his knees beside him. Danny. Hey, Danny, look at me. A faint groan. Good. Alive. The root system had collapsed across Danny's lower body, pinning his legs at an unnatural angle. Joe tried shifting it. It didn't budge. The blast had fused earth and wood into something almost solid. He could hear other Marines shouting somewhere behind him. The clipped chaos of men returning to positions, checking ammo, clearing weapons. The battle hadn't paused for them. The jungle never did. Danny sucked in a breath through clenched teeth. Sarge, can't feel my legs. Joe's throat tightened. He looked back. No corpseman yet. Too far. Too much confusion. And Danny's eyes were rolling, panic taking over. Joe leaned close and gripped his shoulder. Listen to me, kid. You're not dying out here on a damn island you couldn't find on a map 3 months ago. You hear me? Danny's trembling eased, just a little. Joe planted one boot against the largest of the roots, grabbed another section with both hands, and pulled with everything left inside him. Muscle screamed. His ribs felt like they were splintering with each breath. Nothing moved. He changed angles, fingers slipping on dirt and pulp. Again. He wasn't thinking of form or leverage, just lifting, as if will alone could rewrite physics. Finally, on the 5th heave, the root shifted an inch. But an inch was enough. Joe slid his arms beneath Danny's torso, dragging him free before the mass could resettle. Danny cried out, sharp and animal, and Joe nearly lost his grip when pain shot through his own shoulder like a knife. But they fell back together into the dirt, Danny gasping, Joe panting hard enough to choke. That was the second life saved. Not as dramatic as the first, no charging into open fire, no grenade in midair, but every bit as real. Before Joe could regain his bearings, another Marine knelt beside them, Corpsman Shriver, finally through the smoke. His face was pale, sweating, but focused. What the hell happened here? Joe couldn't speak yet. He just pointed to Danny's mangled legs. Shriver set to work immediately, hands moving fast, voice calm. Okay, Rourke, stay with me. Hanks, can you? Gunfire ripped through the trees again, cutting him off. Short, controlled bursts. Japanese reinforcements probing the line. Shriver flinched low. We need to move him. Joe nodded, already reaching under Danny's shoulders again, ignoring the way his own arms shook. Tell me where. Shriver gestured to a shallow depression behind a fallen tree about 20 meters back, the closest thing to cover. There. I'll handle the legs once he's down. Joe lifted Danny, cradling him tight. Danny tried to mask a groan but failed. His fingers clamped onto Joe's sleeve like a drowning man. It's okay, Joe murmured. Almost there. He moved fast, crouched, legs pumping despite the ache building from hip to spine. Twice, rounds cracked overhead, snapping twigs, kicking dirt into the air. Joe didn't stop. He reached the depression, lowering Danny carefully. Shriver followed, sliding in beside them with his medical kit. As the corpsman worked, pressure dressings, morphine syringe, makeshift splints carved from the debris, Joe finally allowed himself to collapse back against the log behind him. For a brief, fragile moment, hidden under the canopy of broken limbs and shadow, time felt suspended. Shriver glanced up. He's not out of danger, but you bought him a chance. Joe closed his eyes, exhaustion dragging him down. We're not done yet. No, Shriver agreed softly, tightening a bandage. But he'll live because of you. Joe didn't answer. He was listening, to the gunfire, to the oncoming footsteps, to the shifting tide of a battle that was far from over. And to his heart. Fast, sharp, alive. He had saved 2 lives in 1 second. And now the jungle was demanding to know what he'd do with the next. The momentary stillness vanished as the jungle canopy erupted again with automatic fire. The Japanese counterattack was no probing effort now. It was a push, coordinated, surging forward with the kind of desperate momentum that came only when an enemy realized their position had been compromised. Joe forced himself upright, every rib protesting. He wasn't fully back in the fight, not yet, but the line didn't care about his pain. The enemy didn't care, and the men around him needed every rifle they had. He He checked his weapon. The M1's chamber was clogged with dirt and coral dust. He slapped the receiver, racked it twice, and spat a curse when it jammed again. Useless for the moment. He grabbed a fallen Marine's bar from beside the log, still warm, still functional, and slid into position just as the undergrowth ahead began to thrash violently. Contact front, a Marine shouted somewhere to Joe's right. Through the foliage, he caught glimpses, shadows darting between trunks, flashes of muzzle fire, the glint of steel helmets moving low to the ground. The Japanese were close. Too close. Shriver kept his head down while securing the final splint around Danny's leg. Hanks, I need a few more minutes. Joe wiped the sweat and dirt from his eyes. You've got what I can give you. Then he leaned out from behind the log and squeezed the trigger. The bar kicked like a mule, chattering out a long burst that carved through leaves and branches in a violent spray. Joe walked the fire along the tree line, forcing the attackers to dive for cover. Shouts echoed. More muzzle flashes answered. But the volume of incoming fire slowed. Just a little. Enough. Shriver finished the splint, slapped a final dressing onto Danny's thigh, and dragged the wounded Marine deeper into the depression. He's stable for now. We need to evac him as soon as the line holds. Line's not holding, Joe muttered. A grenade rolled into view from the left, clinking against stones. Joe didn't think. He lunged sideways, grabbed it, and hurled it back into the brush. A violent detonation cracked the clearing, the shockwave lifting dust in a thick cloud. Jesus, Hanks. Shriver barked. You trying to get yourself killed? Not today, Joe said, though his voice shook. From the right flank came the sound of boots pounding earth, a squad from Fox Company, sprinting in to reinforce. Their sergeant spotted Joe and waved him forward. Hanks, we're pushing up 15 meters to retake the ridge. If they take it, they'll roll this whole sector. Joe didn't hesitate. He looked back once, at Danny, pale but alive, at Shriver, already prepping another piece of gear. I'll be back, he said. Shriver nodded without looking up. Just don't bring half the Japanese army with you. Joe vaulted the log and fell in with Fox Company, joining the staggered line of Marines advancing uphill. The ridge loomed ahead, a steep rise littered with shattered bamboo and smoking craters. Japanese machine guns barked from somewhere near the crest, their rounds slicing through the undergrowth with a terrible, mechanical rhythm. The Marines returned fire, crawling, bounding, leapfrogging forward. Joe's pulse hammered in his skull. He could feel the bar heating beneath his hands. Every few seconds he glanced toward the rear, toward the small hollow where Danny lay hidden. He didn't want the kid alone on this island, even for a minute. A mortar round dropped nearby, sudden, heavy, the sound of air collapsing. The explosion showered the squad with hot fragments. 2 Marines screamed and fell. Joe hit the dirt, ears ringing again, heart thudding faster. He rolled behind a tree trunk as another volley cracked into the bark, carving deep splinters inches from his face. The sergeant pointed forward. Machine gun nest, 30 yards. We take that. The ridge is ours. A simple order. A deadly one. Joe checked the bar. Half a magazine left. He could feel the fear, but he felt something else too. A rising determination that burned hotter than pain or exhaustion. That nest was the reason Danny had nearly been killed. The reason this whole sector was at risk. The reason they were bleeding men by the minute. On me, Joe shouted. The Marines surged forward with him. Leaves whipped his face. Rounds cracked past his ears. The roar of gunfire grew into a solid wall of sound. Joe charged straight toward the nest, straight toward the muzzle flashes lighting up the ridge like sparks in a blast furnace. And somewhere behind him, alive because of one impossible second, Danny Rourke breathed steady beneath the jungle canopy. Joe sprinted up the slope, legs pumping through mud, roots, and shredded foliage. The ridge felt steeper than it looked, carved with deep scars from artillery and mortars. Each step slid backward an inch, but momentum, pure, furious momentum, kept him moving. The machine gun nest barked again. A stuttering roar. A curtain of tracer fire carved through the smoke-filled air just feet above the advancing Marines. Down, someone yelled. But Joe didn't drop. He couldn't. Not with the angle they were at. Going prone meant sliding back, losing position, losing precious seconds the whole line couldn't afford. He kept running. Every instinct in his spine screamed at him to hit the dirt. But he lifted the bar, braced it against his shoulder, and fired a long, punishing burst toward the muzzle flashes. The recoil hammered his arms. Hot casings flew past his cheek. The weapon felt like it might rip itself from his grip. Still, he kept firing. The Japanese gunners ducked low. Their fire paused for half a breath. That was all Joe needed. He closed the distance in a blind rush, the ridge crest looming ahead like a set of jagged teeth. Another Marine, Private Lawson, ran beside him, shouting wordless encouragement, the kind men yelled when meaning and sound blurred under gunfire. A grenade arced out from the nest. Joe saw it in slow motion, dark oval shape tumbling end over end. Grenade. They dove. The blast ripped a crater where they had been standing, showering them in dirt and pulverized coral. Joe's back slammed into the ground hard enough to knock the wind from his lungs. But he rolled, coughing, and forced himself upright. Lawson wasn't moving. Joe dragged him behind a fallen trunk, slapped his helmet. "Lawson, talk to me." A groan, barely audible, but alive. Good. That had to be enough for now. Another burst stitched the ground inches from Joe's boots, sending up sprays of dirt and splinters. He tasted blood, felt the world narrowing to a tunnel, the nest at the end of it. The machine gun kept chattering, but Joe could tell from the rhythm that it was overheating. The barrel was glowing faintly through its slotted shroud, distorting the air above it like desert heat rising off asphalt. This was the moment. He crawled, low and fast, weaving between roots and rocks. Closer, closer. The gunner couldn't depress the barrel enough to hit him. Not yet. He hugged the slope, each inch gained with sheer stubbornness. 15 yards. 10. A sharp shout in Japanese. A shadow moved over the parapet, one of the defenders rising with a rifle, aiming downward. Joe didn't think. He fired from the hip, the bar roaring, the burst snapping the man backward into the nest. The machine gun shifted and spat fire again, but too high, sweeping into the tree canopy. Joe broke into a full sprint. 5 yards. 3. He vaulted the lip of the trench, boots landing inside the sandbagged pit, just as the assistant gunner swung a bayonet toward him in a swift, desperate thrust. Joe twisted aside. The blade grazed his sleeve, slicing cloth, but missing flesh. He slammed the bar's stock into the man's face, hard enough to feel bone give way. The gunner lunged next, pulling a Nambu pistol from his belt. The first shot grazed Joe's ribs, hot, blinding pain. The second shot never came. Joe drove forward, tackling the gunner into the rear wall of the pit. They grappled in a violent tangle of limbs, dirt, and adrenaline. The pistol skittered away. The gunner reached for a combat knife. Too slow. Joe snatched a fist-sized stone from the ground and struck, once, twice, until the man collapsed into stillness. And then, silence. Not complete, not total. The battle still raged down the slope, but inside the pit, the machine gun was quiet for the first time in hours. Joe stood there, chest heaving, sweat and blood mixing and running down his side. His vision wavered, but he remained upright. Fox Company crested the ridge behind him moments later, rifles sweeping, voices rising with a mix of shock and relief. Holy hell, Hanks took the nest. Is it secure? All clear. The sergeant clapped Joe's shoulder. That ridge would have cost us half the company. You just bought us the sector. Joe didn't celebrate. He turned and looked back down the slope, toward the hollow where Danny lay, toward Shriver, toward the men he needed to get back to. We hold this position, Joe said, voice raw but steady. Then we get our wounded out. The sergeant nodded. Understood. Joe wiped the blood from his ribs, hefted the bar, and scanned the jungle for the next threat. Because the ridge was taken, but the battle was far from over. The ridge was theirs, but the jungle didn't reward victories, it punished them. No sooner had Fox Company secured the machine gun nest than a fresh wave of mortar fire thumped in from deeper within the treeling. Each impact sent tremors through the earth, shaking loose leaves and filling the air with drifting ash. Joe ducked beneath the partial cover of the sandbags, teeth clenched as another round exploded 40 yards downslope. Mortars are tracking the ridge, someone shouted. They're zeroing in. Fox Company's sergeant barked orders, repositioning squads, spreading them out across the newly captured crest to avoid clustering. Joe listened, but his eyes were already drifting back toward the jungle below. Back to Danny. Back to the hollow where he'd left the kid breathing, hurting, but alive. Joe grabbed a fresh magazine from a fallen Marine's pouch and slammed it into the bar. His ribs throbbed where the pistol round had grazed him, each breath a sharp reminder that he was running on borrowed time. Still, he pushed the pain aside. It could come later. The sergeant noticed him moving. "Hanks, where the hell you going?" "Down," Joe said simply. "My wounded man's below, and Corpsman Shriver's with him. We need every rifle on this ridge. Jap counterattack could hit again any second." Joe met his eyes, steady, unyielding. "Then I'll bring 2 rifles back with me." The sergeant hesitated. A mortar detonated in the distance, shaking the leaves. "Fine," he finally snapped. "But you step foot off that slope, you're doing it fast. No hero runs. No detours. Get them and get back." Joe nodded once. "Aye, Sergeant." He slipped from the nest and descended the ridge at a low crouch, weaving between shattered trunks and patches of churned earth. The air grew thicker as he sank below the crest, smoke mixing with the bitter, metallic tang of detonated powder. Halfway down, he heard Japanese voices, soft, clipped, too close. Joe froze behind a broad tree trunk, breath shallow. 3 silhouettes emerged through the foliage, scouts, lightly armed, moving cautiously uphill to probe the newly captured ridge. If they kept going, they'd find Danny. Shriver, both unable to defend themselves. Joe tightened his grip on the bar. He couldn't risk a long burst. The report would echo, give away his position. But letting these scouts pass wasn't an option. He crouched lower, muscles coiling. 3, 2, 1. Joe lunged from behind the tree, surprising the nearest scout. He slammed the man's rifle upward with one hand and drove the buttstock of the bar into his throat. The second scout spun, bayonet raised, but Joe fired a short, brutal burst that tore through the man's chest before he reached half stride. The third scout bolted into the brush. Joe dropped to one knee, bracing the weapon, and fired a controlled burst. The jungle swallowed the man, but the cry that followed told Joe the round had found its mark. Silence crept back in, a silence heavy enough to feel. Joe didn't linger. He continued downhill, ducking low, stepping over roots and fallen branches until he spotted the shape of the fallen log marking the hollow. "Shriver," he called softly. "It's me." The corpseman's head popped up, sweat-soaked and weary. Relief crossed his face. "Joe, good timing. I was just about to decide if dragging a full-grown Marine counts as cardio." Joe slid into the depression beside him. Danny lay still, but breathing steadily, color returning to his cheeks. Morphine had eased the worst of it. "He holding on?" Joe asked. "He will," Shriver said, packing away his gear. "But he needs evac to the company aid station, and sooner rather than later." Joe nodded. "Mortars are getting closer. Scouts too. We've got to move." Shriver exhaled. "We carrying him?" "Only one way up that slope," Joe said, "and it's through hell." Shriver tightened Danny's bandages, then helped Joe lift the unconscious Marine into a fireman's carry across Joe's shoulders. The weight nearly buckled his knees. Danny wasn't heavy, but Joe was exhausted, battered, bruised, and bleeding. Didn't matter. He adjusted his stance, steadied his breath. "Stay close. I've got point." Shriver nodded and fell in behind him. Joe stepped from the hollow and started back up the ridge. Every few paces, he paused, listening, watching. The forest felt thicker now, darker. The enemy had pulled back after losing the gun nest, but they were regrouping. The next push would be heavier. Halfway up, a mortar round exploded behind them, showering the trees and debris. Shriver ducked, cursing. Joe pressed forward, legs trembling under Danny's weight. He was almost at the crest when he heard the scraping of boots on rock. Not Marine boots. He spun right. A Japanese soldier emerged from behind a boulder, rifle already raised. Joe didn't have time to think. Didn't have time to lower Danny. Didn't have time to bring the bar up. So he threw himself sideways, pivoting Danny's body behind the trunk of a toppled tree and shielded Shriver with his own. The rifle fired. A shot cracked past Joe's ear. Shriver dove, firing his sidearm. 2 rounds. One found its target. The Japanese soldier fell. Joe gasped, chest heaving. The world swayed around him. "You hit?" Shriver asked, scrambling over. "I'm fine." Joe lied, though his legs felt like wet sand. They reached Fox Company's line moments later, Marines rushing forward to help as Joe finally lowered Danny onto a waiting stretcher. "You made it," the sergeant said, eyes wide with something close to disbelief. "Both of them." Joe wiped the sweat and dirt from his face. Told you I'd bring 2 rifles back. Shriver looked at him, tired but grinning. Hell of a way to prove a point. But Joe wasn't smiling. He looked down at Danny, alive, breathing, saved twice in a single day, and felt the jungle's weight settling over him again. Because the battle was shifting, and the island wasn't done with them yet. For a long moment, there was only the sound of shallow breathing, the rustle of stretcher canvas, and the distant thrum of engines from the evacuation jeeps winding their way toward the ridge. The battlefront had shifted farther inland. The Japanese counterattacks blunted, their mortar pits overrun by combined marine units pushing aggressively forward. But here, on this battered rise of blood-stained soil and shattered palm trunks, a strange and fragile quiet settled. The kind of quiet that came only after surviving something you weren't meant to survive. Joe Hanks sat with his back against the sandbag wall of the captured machine gun nest. His uniform was torn, streaked with dried blood, some of it his, much of it not. The bar lay across his lap, its barrel still warm to the touch even after all this time. His hands trembled quietly on the stock, the adrenaline fading in waves. Down the slope, Shriver supervised the stretcher team as they lifted Danny Rourke into one of the jeeps. The kid was conscious now, barely. Morphine dulled the edges of his pain, leaving him in a heavy, drifting haze. Still, when he saw Joe sitting on the ridge, he lifted one shaking hand. Joe lifted his back. A small gesture, but everything inside it mattered. Shriver walked back up toward him, wiping sweat from his brow. Danny's going to make it, he said, dropping beside Joe. Docs will take him from here. Joe nodded. Good. You saved him twice today, you know. Shriver paused, glancing at Joe's blood-soaked side. Almost lost yourself doing it. Joe shrugged. He's one of ours. The corpseman smiled faintly. Reckless way of showing it. Only way I know. A faint breeze rolled up from the jungle valley, stirring the smoke that still clung to the branches. The sun was lowering, filtered through the canopy, turning the battlefield gold in strange, broken patches. Shriver leaned back, letting out a long breath. Command's calling this ridge secure. They're setting up an artillery observation post here tonight. Joe let his head rest against the sandbags. Figures. We bleed for this pile of dirt. May as well give it a purpose. Yeah, Shriver murmured. But the men won't forget who took it. Joe didn't answer that. Praise wasn't what he needed. Not now. Not ever. His gaze drifted across the forest, the deep, endless green that concealed friend and foe alike. Somewhere in there, others were still fighting. Others still needed saving. This island wasn't through with any of them. But for the first time since dawn, Joe allowed himself to exhale slowly, fully. His ribs ached. His shoulder felt like it had been hit with a sledgehammer, and the cut along his side burned with every breath. He welcomed the pain. It meant he was still here. A Marine runner approached, stopping a few feet from them. Staff Sergeant Hanks? Captain wants you at the forward line briefing. Joe blinked out of the haze of exhaustion. Now. Yes, sir. Says it's urgent. Joe pushed himself up, gripping the edge of the sandbags as his legs steadied beneath him. Of course it is, he murmured. Shriver stood with him. War doesn't give breaks. No, Joe said quietly. But it gives choices. You going to take it easy for a minute before you go? Joe slung the bar over his shoulder, ignoring the way his body protested. No time for that. He took one last look down the slope, toward the jeep carrying Danny Rourke to safety, toward the hollow where a life had nearly been lost, and toward the patch of earth where 1 second had changed everything. Joe didn't believe in fate, but he believed in moments. And today, one moment, a single second, had meant the difference between life and death. Twice, he turned toward the tree line where the forward line waited. Shriver called after him. Hey, Joe, what do I tell Danny when he wakes up and asks who carried him out of hell? Joe paused just long enough to glance over his shoulder. Tell him it was the whole platoon, he said quietly. No one gets out alone. Then he disappeared into the jungle, one Marine among many, moving back toward the sound of distant gunfire, toward the next fight, toward whatever came next on this unforgiving island. The ridge behind him remained quiet, the kind of quiet only earned by men like him.